Now, when you're in your typical operating system, it's very easy to think, oh, the computer's the problem, right? It's just going slow. Maybe I need a new computer. And the analogy here would be, oh, you know what? Cannabis must be addictive because I'm smoking more and more cannabis, and cannabis must be the issue. But in reality, the problem is that you can't see the real problem because your ego and default mode network are protecting you from it, right? So in order to actually get into there, you must go kind of into safe mode, right? Like when you have a virus on a PC, you don't try to fix it from the normal operating system. You shut off your computer, you enter safe mode, right? And the analogy for this is like the safe mode is kind of when your ego and default mode network are offline. And so now with cannabis, right, you're able to get out of that beta brainwave state and access alpha and theta. Now, alpha is great for the flow state, but theta are the brainwaves I want to bring attention to, because what theta waves are the actual brainwaves that hypnosis works with when they're hypnotizing people. And so they are the direct brainwave of the subconscious.
In
this episode of ayahuascapodcast.com, I interview Ryan Sprague. We talk about breaking dependency on cannabis, intentional use of cannabis, science of cannabinoids and endocannabinoids, and relationship between cannabis and ayahuasca. Enjoy this episode. Today, our guest is Ryan Sprague. Is that correct? Sprague?
Yeah, that's correct, bro. You crushed it.
Ryan is the founder of Highly Optimized. He runs a conscious cannabis collective mastermind. He coaches people on intentional use of cannabis. He helps cannabis consumers break dependency and change their relationship with this plant medicine. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Dude, thank you so much, Sam, for having me. You know, it was so amazing getting to meet you through the IG world. One of the amazing things that technology brings about, right? We hear a lot about the struggles of technology, the quote unquote addiction to technology, but a lot of times we don't hear about the amazing connections and the amazing things you can do with that tool, right? Because just like cannabis, ayahuasca, social media is just a tool. How we choose to use it says more about us than the actual tool. So super excited to be able to meet you, man, and dive in and co-create some magic on your show.
Very excited, Ryan. Something you just said very appeals to me a lot regarding plant medicines being tools. You know, you can take a tobacco and you can use it ancestrally and you can heal all kinds of things, or you can pack it into cigarette, add some chemicals to it and get yourself a lung cancer. We did it with cacao, we did it with coca, we did it with tobacco, and who knows how many more other plant medicines, and we're doing it with cannabis as well. So that's why you're here today, to teach us how to use it in such a way that it does not become deadly and is actually helpful. It's kind of like, you know, you have a tool that's like a knife, and you can cook a nice dinner and make a salad, or you can like stab somebody in the heart. So before we get into conscious cannabis use, talk to us about your history with cannabis. Like, what brought you in it, and how did you navigate it, and how did you find the right way to use it?
Yeah, great question, Sam. I think this is a great context builder, because in the world of plant medicine today, I imagine that many people look at me and they're like, how did this kid get attached to cannabis like that? Why cannabis rather than ayahuasca or 5-MeO or peyote or even tobacco or anything, right? And I am a big fan of tobacco as well. But it all started for me when I was 16, and I was struggling with anxiety symptoms, and I went to the doctor, the guy in the white lab coat that I had been, you know, kind of conditioned to trust at face value. And he met with me for all of 5 minutes and then told me that I had anxiety. Not that I was experiencing symptoms of anxiety, but that I had it. So what started happening was I started forming a story around what it meant to be someone that lives with anxiety, what I couldn't do, what I could do. And I started being boxed in to my reality, right? Oh, someone with anxiety couldn't get on stage. Someone with anxiety couldn't have a podcast, right? And I was a musician at this time too. And it definitely started to mess with my head when it came to getting on stage and stuff. And so as I was trying these pharmaceuticals out that the doctor was prescribing to me, how I would describe the experience in language that I would use today is that all these pharmaceuticals did was made me feel less connected to myself, more disconnected. And so one day I was talking to a friend while we were playing guitar, and, you know, I was telling him about what I had been experiencing, you know, stage fright, things like that. And he was like, you know, man, it sounds like what you're experiencing, I have a similar thing, and I find cannabis helps me a lot. And at that point, man, like I had completely bought into all the propaganda around cannabis. I had never done any drugs. I had never drank anything. And so I just said no for a little while. But as these pharmaceuticals, right, kept going into my system and I kept finding over and over again they weren't working, I started to kind of want to throw a Hail Mary. And so one day I was like, you know what, screw it. You know, I'm going to try this. And if it works, awesome. So I tried it. And, you know, the first couple of times you're trying to figure out like, what even is this experience? But it was the third time that I tried it where how I would describe the experience in language today, once again, is that for the first time in about a year and a half since I had been experiencing these symptoms, I felt more connected to myself. And what happened, and again, I had no words for this when it happened, but now I can, you know, kind of reverse engineer it. What happened was I became the observer in that third experience. I realized that I was not my thoughts. I realized I didn't have anxiety. I realized I was just someone experiencing certain symptoms of anxiety, or that could be called anxiety. So I then find this plant that really helps me. And because at that point, I didn't know anything that I know today. I just figured there's something wrong with me. This thing helps me. So I must need more of that all the time to feel better. And so this is a classic trap that a lot of people fall into, right? You know, there's an analogy I like to use here where it's almost like there's a finger pointing you towards the moon or sun. The moon or sun being self-actualization, self-realization, becoming your best self, whatever you want to call that, right? But what ends up happening is instead of actually looking at the finger and looking at where it's pointing, we just end up worshiping the finger itself. And that's what happened with cannabis, right? I failed to understand at that young age that all the plant was showing me was what was already possible, already within me, beyond the current limitations, limiting beliefs, unconscious stories, etc., that I had been kind of were a virus in my mind, right, at that point. And so as the years continued, now I'm about 18, connecting with a lot of cannabis, right, completely unaware of dependent patterns, addictive tendencies, things like that. And plant was still helping me, and quite a bit actually. And I got into school for psychology because after I started with my own mental state, I was like really fascinated with the operating system that is the human mind and the kind of like, you know, frags that can get put into it, right? The viruses, things like that. So I get into school for psychology. And at this age, Sam, I was pretty unhealthy, right? I was like most 18-year-olds, right? I had started drinking alcohol. I was smoking cigarettes. I was eating a lot of Celeste pizzas, right? I always joke that when I stopped eating Celeste pizzas, that company definitely noticed, right? So one day I wake up and I go to the bathroom and I start peeing blood and I have no idea why. So I run upstairs and I tell my dad and he rushes me to the hospital. And when we're on the way to the hospital, he asks me, son, I just got to know, are you doing drugs? And I said, no, but I am connecting with a lot of cannabis. And this was kind of like my dad had always been like a just say no type guy. He wasn't like strongly against it, but he definitely wasn't for it. He was kind of in the sea of indifference in the middle. But when I told him this, right, when I said, yeah, I am connecting with a lot of cannabis, I saw him have a sigh of relief out of the corner of my eye. And that was very interesting to me because I had this like doomsday scenario of what would happen if my dad found out I utilized cannabis. But in this like very anxious state I was in, right, like peeing blood and not knowing why, I just wanted to tell the truth because I didn't know. Did it have an interplay? I have no idea. But when I saw him in the sigh of relief, I thought that was interesting. So we go to the hospital and I start showing him a lot of the research I've been doing on cannabis. I bring my laptop to the hospital. I was there for like 5 days. Ended up being a benign cyst on my kidney that had broken open and just put blood into my urine. Luckily, it wasn't cancer or anything crazy, but it definitely pattern interrupted me, you know? So when I was sitting there showing my dad all this info, I was showing him documentaries like Leaf by Dr. William Courtney. Great documentary. It's pretty old now. It was out in like 2011, but it's all about this doctor, Dr. William Courtney, who meets this patient with something like 8 to 11 autoimmune disorders. And she's basically on death's doorstep. And he starts having her juice raw cannabis leaves. So no intoxicating properties, right? You're not getting high, nothing. You're just getting a lot of what's called THCA. And over the course of about 6 months, or maybe a year, right around there, he put all 8 to 11 of her autoimmune disorders into remission. And then at the end of the video, they get married. It's really cool, right? Now they do the work together. So I was showing him these things, and to his credit, he had no cognitive dissonance. He was like, wow, I guess I didn't know what I didn't know. If this plant's helping you, I support you, right? Because he had known what I went through with anxiety. So a couple of years later, I end up going to the Boston Freedom Rally, which here in Massachusetts is a big public display of disobedience, right? So basically, it was a much bigger deal before cannabis was legal here, but you'd all go into the city, you'd, collect on the green, and you'd all connect with cannabis. And as long as you weren't selling anything or being an idiot, the cops wouldn't bother you. So I'm there and I hear this guy yelling, "Who wants to make butter with me?" So I walk over to his little canopy tent, and he's passing out these pamphlets for a new cannabis school opening up 5 minutes from where I was living at that point. So I run home and I tell my dad, right, this is the first like, fuck yes, Sam, that I ever felt in my heart. And so I run home, I tell my dad, I'm like, hey, can you help me with tuition? And he says, I'll do one better. I'll actually go with you. I'm really excited to learn about what you're interested in. You know, my dad was always a big supporter. Even if he wasn't, you know, doing or connecting with cannabis, he was really excited to learn more about it. So we start going to the school together. And, you know, right off the bat, I knew like, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life. I didn't know what I wanted to do, whether it was work in the industry, et cetera. But I started learning a lot about regenerative agriculture, Korean natural farming, the pharmacology of cannabis, the science, the medical, and all the different facets of it. And I just started really soaking it up. And I convinced my dad to buy me a grow kit right before we started at the school. And our first harvest was pretty terrible, to be honest. And so when I told him about the school, he was like, well, hey, we just invested in this grow kit. Why don't I invest in you to learn how to do this the proper way? So I ended up interning for the school, working for them. And in 2014, I decided to go to my first music festival. And at this point, Sam, I had never tried any other medicine. I had still bought the propaganda around these other medicines, but not cannabis. And so I had heard a lot about MDMA, and I did some research, and I realized it's a heart opener. I had no idea what that meant as a 23-year-old, but I was like, all right, I guess we'll figure it out. So two of my friends and I went out to Vegas, and we had never connected with MDMA before. We had gone to a lot of clubs and stuff and just seen a very interesting depiction of what MDMA was. So we had certain beliefs around it. But when we were going out there, we were like, why not try it? So we tried, and we're in the middle of this gigantic crowd listening to whatever artist was on. And I feel this really interesting pull towards my dad. Didn't know really what it was, but I just knew there was an interesting feeling. So when I get home, right, I end up realizing my dad told me that right before I got home, he had gone to the doctor for a lung pain he was having and realized he had terminal cancer, stage 4 terminal cancer. And so when I was at the school, right, a couple of years before, I had been actually working intimately with patients in helping them treat and cure their cancer with the assistance of cannabis, specifically a substance called RSO, Rick Simpson oil, or its more professional name in the cannabis industry, FICO, full extract cannabis oil. And for anyone that hasn't heard about this, you can go on PubMed, research how THC kills cancer cells. It's pretty out there and in the open now. So my dad elected not to take treatment, chemo and radiation, et cetera. And so, you know, I knew he wasn't going to survive this because he was still wanting to smoke cigarettes and drink Coca-Cola and eat steak and cheese subs and all the things that gave him cancer. But, you know, at that moment, I had a kind of fork in the road experience where I was like, do I love my dad for who he's been my whole life, supportive, amazing, loving, albeit unhealthy? Or do I try to change him into who I think he should be so maybe I can keep him around longer, but also potentially ruin his quality of life by trying to change his diet and all these things? So I luckily chose the first path, and I decided to be like, you know what, Dad, whatever you need support with, let me know. So after a couple of weeks, he started experiencing some pretty severe pain in his lungs, and it had already spread to his brain. It was all throughout his body. So I started convincing him, because at this point, he had still never connected with cannabis, Sam, right? So I started convincing him like, Dad, you know, we went to the school together. We learned about this. At least we can increase your quality of life, right? So he finally agrees reluctantly. He was a big fan of control in his life. He didn't like altering his state of consciousness. So I would sit with him while I was administering this RSO, because here's someone who's never connected with cannabis, and now they're like connecting with the strongest form on planet Earth. And this, Sam, is when I really discovered the spiritual powers of cannabis, the real power, in my opinion. Like, yes, it's amazing that it can help with so many health conditions. Yes, it's amazing that it can increase our mood, right? And, you know, reduce anxiety and help depression and these kind of things. But for me, none of that, everything paled in comparison to what I discovered, because I thought I knew my dad really well. You know, I'm an only child, and, you know, we had gone to breakfast every Sunday my whole life, gone to car shows. I mean, we were very close. But all of a sudden I started administering this medicine, and I see a totally different side of my dad come out, a side that was much more infinite. And my dad was not really a spiritual person, but a side of him came forth that was much more spiritual. I mean, he wouldn't have called it that, but that's how I can recall it now. And you know, what was happening was he was able to look at death as a celebration of the graduation instead of something that was challenging and an ending. It was more like he was able to look at it like the beginning of a new chapter, right? And the sea of infinite chapters that is our life, right? Or is our existence in this infinite reality. And so during that time, I got to watch him create closure with his grandchildren, with his other children from previous marriages, with me, my mother, but most importantly, his own mortality. And so he was given until October. He was diagnosed in July. He was given until October that following year. He had small cell carcinoma. It was very intense and aggressive. He ended up lasting all the way till the following June. And when we were getting his scans back, his tumors were slowing their growth every single time he got a scan back. They were still there, right? They were still growing, but they were slowing their growth quite a bit. And so after he passed, I was so grateful that I got to have that time with my dad. And I don't know if I ever would have had that time with my dad if it weren't for cannabis. I know it wouldn't have been the exact same, put it that way. I can't go back and try it a different way. But after that, I really decided to make this my life's work, not just teaching people how to grow and the things that a lot of people think I do, right? Which I do, but the more spiritual side of like, this plant can really help you like open up to who and what you truly are. So I go from there into the cannabis industry. I work with 5,000 medical patients over 5 years with a range of different, modalities, holistic health, coaching, etc. And then in 2019, I had a great opportunity where a corporation bought out the dispensary I worked at. And, Sam, like, I imagine you'll understand what I mean here. When a cannabis dispensary starts looking and feeling like an Apple store, it's time for me to get the hell out of there. That's what I tried to avoid my whole life, that corporate grind, that corporate feel. And so at the time, I was playing a victim about it. I was really pissed that this company had come in and taken over our dispensary because, we had a really good thing going, right? But I'm very grateful to them in hindsight, because if it weren't for them coming in and doing so many things that were out of alignment with me, I don't know if I ever would have left that dispensary and had the courage to start my own business. But because of all that pent up frustration, I was like, you know what, I'm going to do my own thing. Had no idea, Sam, what I was doing. No idea. I have no business background, nothing. So I ended up starting the Highly Optimized podcast in 2019. I ended up going through this big awakening out in Vegas when I went to MJ BizCon. And what happened was I ended up connecting with some MDMA with my partner, and I had a big breakthrough that I wasn't taking ownership over my life. And when I got back, right, when I was flying back on the plane, I started to ask my soul, like, where is this coming from? This ability for me to play a victim in my life and all this stuff that I'm feeling right now. And the plan was like, well, a lot of it is, my soul was like, a lot of it is you numbing out with cannabis every night. You come home from this job with all the frustration necessary to make a change, and you're just coming home and numbing out. That's not respecting the plant, and it's not respecting yourself. And so when I came back, I decided to take a 3-month break from cannabis. And this was the first break I had taken in 10 plus years. I was not an all-day consumer. I would just smoke at night when I got home. And that was what made it a little bit harder for me to realize this, because in my mind, I was like, no, I'm vaporizing only once a night. I'm connecting with my own homegrown cannabis. It's organic. All the logical things to tell me everything's fine. But my soul just checked me, And so came back, took that 3-month break. For the first 6 weeks, really felt like, oh, cannabis did this to me. Cannabis is addictive. And then I realized my second awakening, which was, no, I've worked with over 5,000 people in this space, and not everyone's addicted. So it's not objective. So what's going on inside of me that's led me to these dependent patterns? And that's when I actually started diving into trauma and started creating awareness around that. And then after about 3 months, I decided to actually create an experiment for myself. I was like, I was doing a lot of research on cannabis and remembering what it did with my dad. And I decided, you know what if I could actually use cannabis to tap me deeper into my trauma and start actually relieving myself of all this weight I'm carrying? So I started this trend where I would only connect with cannabis on weekends, because my pattern had been to numb out on weekdays. So I ended up only connecting on weekends. And I have creating intention, creating a ceremonial container. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just guessing, right? Based on what I thought would help me, because I was already intentional with my health, my sleep, and all these other things. And so all of a sudden, my life started shifting so hard before I knew it. And we can get into any one of these components in greater detail if you want, but not to keep talking too long. Basically, what happened was I allowed cannabis to help me manifest the entire life I live today. From going on Aubrey Marcus, to being personal friends with Paul Chek, to having the entire program, to having the largest collection of cannabis data on the internet, to having a worldwide community. All of this was assisted in manifesting with cannabis. So it's been an absolutely amazing journey, man. There's a lot more that goes into it, but I'll stop there for now. Really amazing to be able to relive that, because it's really the hero's journey as I see it. And there's a lot of components in there that we can dive into with regards to what I've learned about cannabis addiction and, all the other facets as well.
It's great to interview you, Ryan, because I ask one question, you just keep doing it pretty much the entire podcast. I mean, that's probably because you're a podcast host yourself, and you refine your story. That's great. First of all, my condolences to your dad's passing, and but at the same time, I think the way you dealt with it, and for your dad's good as well, using this medicine to help him. which kind of like you mentioned so many things. I'll just touch upon them and we'll see where we take it from here. But about, death being a spiritual process, it's it's very interesting. I interviewed a few people on like near-death experiences and stuff like that. So people think that, spirituality is that thing, but in the end, when you're born and when you die and sometime in the middle, it is all a spiritual process. So it's so great when you can guide somebody through their death with that. And I think for this progression you went through from like, it's a drug, no, it's a medicine, okay, it does something to my brain, kind of scientific approach, reading studies, and then you go the full circle where like, oh, okay, there's a spiritual aspect to it. It happened to me with ayahuasca as well. Absolutely cookie cutter, same like, yeah, I'm depressed, let me just take it, maybe it will like reset my brain, serotonin, whatever, BDNF. And then all of a sudden when you start working with and you start noticing those synchronicities, and you mentioned a few as well, when you feel like life is guiding you, like, okay, you know what, there's a spiritual side to those things. So many things you touched upon, but let's talk about the spiritual side of cannabis. Have you met the spirit of the cannabis? What do you see it like? What is it? And maybe if you know something about it, why does the spirit of cannabis not really be friendly with spirit of ayahuasca? I don't know if you heard anything about that.
I have, man. So, it's really funny, man. So the spirit of cannabis is the best archetype I could relate it to is the jester. And, when you look at the tarot deck, there's a very good reason why the jester is the final archetype in the tarot deck. Because to the naked eye, the jester looks like just a silly goose, right? Just like a goofy, silly, kind of like not taken seriously type individual. But what the layman's individual will not understand, or maybe fail to understand about the jester, is that the jester is actually a very high level of consciousness. Because if you look at the Bible, if you look at all these different things, right? Laughter is the best medicine. If you want to enter the kingdom of heaven, you must first enter the mind of a child, right? So when you look at the jester, he's the only one in the kingdom, right, that is allowed to make fun of the king, not because he's just allowed to, but because he knows how to do it in the way where the king is able to save face. And also at the same time, the crowd is able to actually transmute some of their frustration towards the king. So the jester is extremely beneficial in a community, because without him or her, what's going to happen is undoubtedly the citizens of that country or that city or that, whatever, are going to start to grow resentment against the king, because they're not going to see the king as one of them. So when the jester is able to, court himself, right, around the king and with the people there, it allows the king or the queen or whatever royalty is there to be seen as more human, right? And so for me, cannabis is what allows life to be seen in a totally different way. And what I mean by that is that while medicines like 5-MeO or peyote, or I'm sure ayahuasca as well, can send you very deep and very out, right? Cannabis, on the other hand, allows you to still be part of reality, like still be fully your human self, but to see something different within it. And for me, I've had this download that for me personally, I'm not sure if this resonates with everyone, but for me personally, if I know that I've been there, wherever there is, for infinity, and I'll be there for infinity, well, I'm only here in this meat suit for a finite amount of time. And so for me, I found cannabis to be really beneficial to allow my spirit side and my humanness to integrate into one being, and also allow me to realize that I'm just inhabiting this human body for a little while, and that it's actually hilarious, right? Like life is hysterical, right? Have you ever seen a platypus before? It's hysterical. And those are the kind of things that cannabis reminds you of, right? They seem stupid to the naked eye, but when you really tap into it, laughter is the best medicine. It's one of the highest forms of consciousness you can possibly have, to be able to laugh at yourself, to be able to laugh at the hilarity of life. And so that's one of the things that I really feel the cannabis spirit is all about, is about allowing us to enter the mind of a child again and realize, like, dude, this is awesome, first of all, and this is also hilarious, right? That we're on this planet. A lot of us don't even believe there is a God, right? Or a creator or anything. And that's okay, no judgment, right? But some of us are attached to that. And there's all these different sides and different things. And at the end of the day, we all come from just one being. And at the same time, we also have individual cells within our bodies that are kind of like the as within, so without type thing, right? So cannabis allows you to have these realizations about your spirit side, but also the humanness and how they come together. So for me, that's how I see the spirit of cannabis. And I've met the spirit of cannabis many times, and I can always tell when I'm meeting her because, she'll come, she's very like, I don't know if this is just my brain making this, but she'll be very green, she'll be very luscious, but she's not super old. She's probably in her like 30s, 40s is what I've noticed, at least the depiction that's come to me. And she's always ready to just take whatever challenge you're working through and make you laugh about it, and help you see it as an opportunity, help you what I call flip the script on it, right? See it from a new perspective. And I really feel like that's what cannabis strives and really is amazing at doing. Because let's say you take 5 grams of mushrooms, right? You're going to get a perspective shift, but you're probably going to have to wait until you come back down to ground level to actually make sense of that and try to integrate it. Whereas cannabis, you can connect to some cannabis, get what I call a idea, right? Open up your phone, immediately take integrative action on it and go back into your ceremony. So for me, I find it's also very practical for most people in the world right now. Because again, ayahuasca, these other medicines are fantastic, but a lot of people can't afford to go to the jungle. They might have a family or work they can't take time away from, but they can grow a plant in their backyard. They can utilize intention and ceremony and learn how to, uncover some of these unconscious blocks that are stopping them from being their best self. And so that's what I would say the spirit of cannabis is for me. And, it's funny you bring up the ayahuasca and cannabis thing because, for me, obviously, I told you before we started, I have yet to sit with ayahuasca. But I have a really good buddy who's an ayahuasquero. His name's Hamilton Souther. He runs Blue Morpho down in Peru. And so I asked him about this, because I'd heard a lot about it. And I was like, hey, man, what's all this stuff I hear about cannabis and ayahuasca not enjoying each other or being jealous spirits and whatnot? And what his response was, dude, that's human shit, man. He's like, listen, at the end of the day, many lineages do not entertain cannabis in the ayahuasca space, not because they know cannabis to be bad here. It's just not part of their lineage. They've had a proven process for thousands of years. Why are they going to shift that, right? But for him, he went down from America about 25 years ago, and so he had a different background, right? And he actually refound cannabis where basically he had gotten in a motorcycle accident down in Peru, and he had some nerve damage. And so he was going through a lot of pain, and he was laying in bed one day, and one of the people that worked at the retreat center that he was training at came in and was asking him, Hamilton, how you doing? And he was saying, oh man, I'm going through a lot of pain right now. And they were like, oh, why don't you use cannabis? And he was like, cannabis? He's like, shit I used to smoke in college? He's like, that's just a silly plant. Like, no, I'm here to do ayahuasca and whatnot. Like, could that help me? And they're like, no, actually cannabis is going to help a lot more with nerve pain. So he's like, okay. So he tries it, right? He's laying in bed, unable to move. He tries it and he's like, dude, I went just as deep as ayahuasca. Like, it changed my life forever. And that's when he started actually combining cannabis into ayahuasca sessions. And so he practices kind of what the Santo Daime practice with cannabis and ayahuasca together. And he's found in his subjective experience that they get along just great. So who knows really what it is, right? Are these two spirits really against each other? Is the belief that they are, right, then manifesting that in the experience? I'm not sure, right? I'll have to connect with ayahuasca and cannabis together to let you know. But that's my feeling on it without having tried ayahuasca. And that's what I've heard from Hamilton and for many people to practice the Santo Daime approach. I have many friends that have gone to that approach, and they don't always include cannabis, right? It's not like a given, but there are certain reasons why they would include cannabis into that picture. And so that's for me what I choose to believe, that they're not jealous at all, that as long as you use intention and you're clear on what you're doing, why you're doing it, etc., that they ultimately just want to help you get to what your goal is. And yeah, it may be a challenging experience, but it's all there to help you, if you can see it that way.
Yeah, I had Hamilton on the podcast as well. We spoke about it. And yeah, it's interesting because those are two very strong, very similar looking spirit presences, right? Like they all described as green and luscious and flowery and feminine. So the jealousy, maybe it comes like, having 2 women at the same kitchen. It's a bit of a... So maybe they can have a good relationship if whatever the container is, if whatever the container is can make them peaceful. But what we do notice is people that smoke a lot of weed when they come to the retreat, they can't connect to ayahuasca. So like they require larger doses and they just can't sort of break through. So, but maybe when you do connect and after that relationship is established, maybe then they can start working together. So I don't know how jealous they are. Or how it is specifically, but it definitely helps to quit weed for, I invited you to the wire as well, and I'm sure you're going to come, so you'll have to do one of your weed fasts for at least a week. And then after you connect, maybe after the retreat, you can smoke and you can tell me what what you learn about the spirits. I'm not a big weed guy. I do like it, and I do use it consciously, really rarely, but very consciously. And I'm mostly a fan. But you mentioned the tools, right, in the toolbox, and I hope that the, medicines and plant spirits are not going to get offended for calling them tools. But it's like you have ayahuasca, right, and you do it, and you break through, and you learn all those things. But then let's say you're back in the real world, and you're getting a little stressed, and things are not going your way. You can, work with some mushrooms, and but let's say you have muscle pain, you work with some cannabis, and those are tools. Those are amazing tools, and you can have your own toolbox and use them accordingly, as long as it's conscious and intentional. So let's talk about that. How did you go from abusing cannabis to then using it consciously and intentionally to now coming to the point where you have this mastermind where you not only do it yourself, but you teach people how to change their relationship with cannabis. So tell us maybe about that progression, and also how might it look like for someone to be using cannabis consciously?
Definitely, dude. I love this question. So for me, I shared a little bit about it. For me, it was the first realization was that I had been numbing out my emotions with cannabis, right? And for me, I was in the industry, as cringy as this is, people at the dispensary called me Weed Jesus. So I had built an identity around this cannabis consumer version of me. So when I went through this awakening, and it really was an awakening, I'm not sure whether to call it a Kundalini awakening, I'm not sure. When you get those qualitative things going on, I have no idea what happened. It was a shift, right? And so what happened was, the first thing was I was able to take accountability and ownership over the fact that, oh, wow, I am utilizing this tool in an incorrect manner for what I'm actually looking for what my soul is actually looking to do and be in this lifetime. I'm not in right relationship with this plant. And so at first I had that awareness, and my victim mentality kicks in, and I'm like, the plant did this to me, right? And that's where a lot of people are at, right? They think they're really addicted to cannabis, that cannabis is dependent forming and all these things. And what happened was, after about 6 weeks, I had my second kind of like hit to that awakening, which was, wait a minute, if it was addictive for everyone, if it was objectively addictive, then everyone I would have worked with would have been addicted to it. But I knew that wasn't the case. So then I started actually diving in and figuring out, like, what is it that's leading to this? And then I started realizing, like, oh, wait, the plant never held a gun to my head and forced me to connect with it. So cannabis is not the addiction, right? The addiction to cannabis that I was experiencing was not my problem. It was just the sign that there was a problem going on inside of me. Because what I realized through my time in the next year of connecting with it consciously, with intention, and we'll get into what that looks like, but connecting with it consciously and with intention, what I realized was that actually the real problem were the feelings of discomfort living within me, stemming from traumas that were unconscious to me. And that what I had been utilizing cannabis for was to just try to cover those things up. But actually what the plant is meant to do is help you dive directly into those. Because when you're in your normal operating system as a human being, like right now for me and you, Sam, and for most people listening, you're going to be in a beta brainwave state. You're going to have your ego, your default mode network, doing their best to quote unquote protect you, right, from danger. But the challenge with these systems is that the information is fractionalized. They don't see the full totality of your experience. So they end up thinking that anything uncomfortable for you is danger, right? Don't let them feel that. So the ego and default mode network, I don't see them as the enemy. I just see them as doing their job. But what happens is, very similar to a computer, especially a PC, what happens is, let's say you're going around and you're going on websites and you get a virus, right? And you're like, uh-oh, that's not good, right? But you can't really figure out what's going on. You just know your computer's going slower. You're not really sure, right? And the analogy here would be like, you're just smoking more and more cannabis. You're not sure what's going on, but you just have this incessant feeling inside of you that you need to smoke more and more, right? Or drink more coffee, or smoke more tobacco, or insert coping strategy here, right? So you're having trouble figuring out, what is this thing? Now, when you're in your typical operating system, it's very easy to think, oh, the computer's the problem, right? It's just going slow. Maybe I need a new computer. And the analogy here would be, oh, you know what? Cannabis must be addictive because I'm smoking more and more cannabis, and cannabis must be the issue. But in reality, the problem is that you can't see the real problem because your ego and default mode network are protecting you from it, right? So in order to actually get into there, you must go kind of into safe mode, right? Like when you have a virus on a PC, you don't try to fix it from the normal operating system. You shut off your computer, you enter safe mode, right? And the analogy for this is like the safe mode is kind of when your ego and default mode network are offline. And so now with cannabis, right, you're able to get out of that beta brainwave state and access alpha and theta. Now, alpha is great for the flow state, but theta are the brainwaves I want to bring attention to, because what theta waves are the actual brainwaves that hypnosis works with when they're hypnotizing people. And so they are the direct brainwave of the subconscious. So we know, right, from all the research out these days that our traumas, our challenges are stored in our subconscious. So Albert Einstein has a great quote: you can't solve a problem from the same level of thinking that created the problem. And so what a lot of people try to do is they try to figure out their problem from the problem state of mind. And that's not going to work. And so what ends up happening is, in a very logical way, people end up believing that cannabis is this problem for them. But in reality, even if they break their quote unquote addiction to it and they don't handle that trauma underneath, they're just going to find another thing to get addicted to. Now, maybe it's a quote unquote healthier thing like exercise until they get tendonitis and have injuries. But again, at the end of the day, for me, life is not about surviving. It's about thriving, you know? And this is my problem I have with AA and NA and all these different addiction programs, is that they look at the substance as the problem. But all that does is make someone fucking terrified to ever be around it again, right? And again, like for anyone who's done AA or NA, I'm not knocking your experience with it, but for me as an individual, it didn't resonate, because for me, true freedom is not abstinence. Abstinence, in my mind, is just another addiction, right? How many people do we know that form a whole identity around being sober, right? And so at the end of the day, true freedom for me is being able to, in the moment, know if it's a calling or a craving and act accordingly and in alignment with your soul. And so for me, you know, what I really dove into was that once I was able to access this theta brainwave state and know what to do with it, I was actually able to feel that trauma and heal it, because all we need to do to heal it is feel it, right? And it's kind of like that really interesting paradox for most human beings, because when we're going through this problem on a daily basis, we must think, you know, oh my God, we need so many things to fix this, right? We need to go to therapy. We need to work with coaches, and those things can help. Like, I'm a coach. I do that stuff, right? But the reason I work with cannabis with my clients is because for me personally, you know, time is the most finite resource that we have, and it's also the most valuable. And so for me, if I was looking to heal a trauma and I had choices between, do I want to go to talk therapy or do I want to include a plant medicine and talk therapy into it, I would always choose the latter. Because for talk therapy, once again, you're trying to solve the problem from the level of thinking that created it. Whereas if you connect with cannabis, go in and create awareness, right? Get ideas, then you can come back and talk about it, and it's much more efficient, right? I can get clients from completely traumatized states to feeling really good in their body within a couple of months now, you know? And again, like, this is not everyone's path. I never want anyone to hear this and go, oh my God, this must be right for me. Because just like ayahuasca is not the perfect medicine for everyone, cannabis is not either, right? Doesn't mean it's not a great medicine. It just means that the same way that, you know, you might not like orange juice, doesn't mean orange juice is objectively bad. It's just not Sam's flavor of juice, right? And so that's a lot of what I learned in my experience and now what I teach people. And when you look at intentional and conscious use, for me, that's being aware of what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you're looking to get out of it, right? So when you have those three things, you're practicing being more self-aware. And that's really what cannabis does too. And many plant medicines, right? I think all of them do that. But at the end of the day, these plants, and I imagine you'll understand this and resonate with it, these plants are not here to fix you. They're not here to, they don't want to be worshipped. They want to be respected. They want to be held in reverence, but they don't want to be worshipped like they're the healer, right? They want to be in a co-communicative and co-creative relationship with you. They want to be able to give you some ideas, right? Some downloads, some awareness, feel some stuff. And then they want you to go out and provide the other 50% of the equation, which is integration. And so a lot of what we do now is focused on allowing people to learn how to set really proper intentions. Because a lot of people, right, they'll start an intention like, I don't want to be upset anymore. And it's like, you know what the universe is hearing? I want more of being upset, right? Because when you state things in the negated point of view, you're focusing on what you don't want. And that's the problem with our language. And a big part of what I do in my coaching work is help people really create affirmative language in their life, right? That looks at where they want to go, not where they don't want to come from. And so at the end of the day, a lot of that is based on, you know, understanding how language works, allowing people to create intention, allowing them to understand how to create a ceremonial container. And a lot of the ceremonies we have in Connect with Cannabis are all combining different self-development exercises and different modalities with cannabis, from meditation and breath work, pretty basic, to musical therapy, to connection exercises and intimacy work, to inner child work, somatic experiencing, story work, narrative trauma work. We dive into all this stuff with cannabis. And that's really what I've learned, is that if someone is able to take accountability over the fact that cannabis never held a gun to their head, stop blaming the plant for why you're addicted. You're not addicted to cannabis. You're addicted to getting away from your trauma. And the same way that you learn to get away from it, right, unconsciously, you can actually choose to go directly into that and heal those traumas in a matter of minutes in many cases, and stop a pattern that's been in you for potentially 10 years, And when people start being able to find out how to give themselves comfort, right, how to heal themselves, well, naturally now when they start to feel upset, they don't just go, oh my God, cannabis is all I can do, right? They may find if they try meditating or getting through something and they feel blocked, okay, I'm going to connect with a little bit of cannabis. Oh, that's what's going on. Now come back and integrate it and live a better life. So that's really what we're doing in the CCC and what I've done in my own life to be able to go from a completely victimized, disempowered state of not just with cannabis, with my whole life, right? Because how we do anything is how we do everything, to be able to share with people like, hey, listen, you can believe cannabis is addictive. You can play the victim if you want. And you know what? In the microcosm that is a relationship with cannabis, how big of a deal is that? Who knows? But the big deal is that if you're doing it there, you're doing it everywhere in your life. And where could you benefit from taking more accountability and ownership and realizing that you get to be your own guru in this lifetime? And that the same way that you're telling yourself potentially that the whole world is to blame, none of them are to blame, right? When you get triggered, that's a you problem, right? That's an opportunity for you to dive into. So a lot of this is what we teach when it comes to intentional and conscious use of the plant.
Beautiful explanation, Ryan. Thank you. I like that you talk about addiction being a symptom of a pain. I think that's Gabor Mate. I'm a big fan of Gabor Mate. I'm trying to manifest me interviewing him for the podcast. So guys, help me manifest it. Maybe somebody knows the number.
Yes.
So he says, don't look for the substance, look for the pain. As you can say, anyone can be addicted to anything as long as it takes their pain away. So it's important to look at it. I want to add something from my own understanding with working with plant medicines is I'll use tobacco as an example here. I have a cigar that's been gifted to me for my birthday. That was a week ago. I'll use it as an example for those who are watching a video. So it is a beautiful piece of tobacco, right? And I can just pour myself a glass of whiskey, which I don't drink, but hypothetically, and then sit and smoke that cigar. That's one thing. Probably some benefit might come with it. I maybe feel less stressed, or maybe I'll enjoy it, and that's all good. But if I would take this tobacco, and if I would find myself time in nature, maybe even I have a bonfire, maybe even I have an intention. And I think the key word is an intention. If I then set an intention and I really sit down and talk to this plant spirit and I say, no, this is where I want to achieve with it. And then I go through that process instead of talking to a friend, which I like to do when I work with tobacco, but I just sit there and I meditate and I really try to communicate through that plant medicine to, the spiritual side of things. All of a sudden, this becomes like an antenna, like something that fortifies my signal, and all of a sudden, good things come from it. I had answers come to me through tobacco, which is not psychedelic. It's barely any shape psychoactive, when you compare it to cannabis or especially stuff like ayahuasca. But it is nevertheless a plant of power, and in the hierarchy of plants, it's very high up there. So I think it's all about that intention. So I can only imagine if somebody works with cannabis and they sit down, do their own ceremony, whatever they like it, or maybe how you teach them, and then they set an intention. They're really, really focused. That's a totally different thing. But I love the way you explain it with the brain states. And I think that right now, interviewing you and many other people, I think that we're forming this more holistic view on how you can heal yourself with many different plants, many different modalities. You mentioned somatic experiencing. I interviewed Joshua Sylvain in the last episode all about that. It's just great. I think we're living in such a great time where we have all those tools and we have all those challenges, but we have like everything we need to fix them. And over, I'm assuming people that listen to your podcast or listen to my podcast are now forming this amazing, awesome worldview, which is great to just basically help them overcome and do the work, most importantly, which you also mentioned. People need to be ready to do the work and not blame the plant or the government or whatever they want to blame. Like, you're the only one to blame. You can fix everything. So let's talk a little bit about that, about doing the work, how it might look like. You mentioned talk therapy in combination with the plant medicine. So what do you recommend somebody, they're working with cannabis, they're getting some information, they want to do the work. What should they do?
So I'll start from like the person that's maybe listening to this who's like, oh man, I'm addicted, right? They're still at that point, right? And I'll kind of like traverse it through the kind of different stages that someone may be in. So the clients that come to me, right? The first archetype is someone that really believes they're addicted to cannabis, right? And so if anyone listening right now really feels that, I first want to give you, I want to give you grace for that, right? Like, I remember when I was at that point, and I understand that some of the stuff I might be saying might be triggering, right? And so this is the first thing to do, to try this out in your own life. So the first thing you're going to do is, for the first week, don't even try to cut back on cannabis, right? Don't even worry about that. But the only difference you're going to make is, before you connect with the plant, all you're going to do is you're going to honestly ask yourself, why? What is the reason I'm going to this plant? And if you're honest with yourself, you're going to start to see trends come out over this week, right? So maybe you start writing down, I'm bored. I had a shitty day at work. I really feel good and I wanted to celebrate. Whatever it is, just write that down. And over the first week, you're going to start to notice, like, oh, shit, seems like 70% of the time I'm called to connect with this plant. Seems like it's my job, right? So then from there, you create the correlation, right? Oh, it's my job, right? Then from there it becomes, okay, well, what is your vision for the future of you and cannabis, right? How do you want to connect with this plant, right? Do you want to be just numbing out after work? Like, what's your vision for this? And who must you become to be able to enact that vision? So a lot of this is like manifestation type stuff, right? Like really thinking into like, who am I in this world? How do I want to connect with this plant? And what are my goals with it? And then from there, the last point is trying to figure out what the structure is that's going to support that. So maybe, right, for instance, you find out that it's your job, right, that's leading you to unconsciously connect with the plant and numb out. And now that you're aware of this, you have the opportunity to make a change. And that change is either one of two things. Either you find a new job or you find enjoyment at the one you're at for now, right? That's it. And so let's say it's a new job that you want to find. Well, now the structure would be, okay, what time each day are you going to dedicate to looking for new jobs? What days are you going to dedicate to applying for these jobs? And what are you going to do at the job you're at right now, right? How are you going to show up there? You know, you're a different man or a different woman in a different river now. So how are you going to show up there? So that's what I would do if you're full-blown dependent. Start figuring out what your unconscious triggers are and start creating correlations and create a vision and the structure for how you're going to get to that vision, right? And this is what we do in our Clarity with Cannabis course. Our first course in the CCC is we help people do that, all right? And we have weekly calls every week and things like that. But let's say that someone is maybe coming to me, this is like the second archetype, right? They're someone who's connected with cannabis and they've been pretty conscious with it, but they're not really sure what the plant does, right? They've never really had an addiction to it or addiction, right? But they just, I don't know, sometimes they get like a really cool experience. Sometimes they just don't really know what the hell's happening. So they kind of have this like in between, right? For that kind of person, the best thing to do is to start with intention, right? Start proving to yourself over and over that this plant does work in a co-creative fashion with you. So what you can do is create an intention like, I want to feel more relaxation on the other side of this joint, this bowl, etc. And then actually start to confirm yourself with this. And this is why I love starting a confirmation journal, right? So what I would do here is the first thing would actually be to figure out what you're looking to get from cannabis, right? Your intention. And then from there, let's say it's relaxation once again. After the experience, right, you connect with the plant, you maybe work through a meditation, you maybe do some breath work, you maybe just take a walk in the woods, maybe you just hang out and watch Netflix, right? It doesn't matter what you want to do, right? I want to get all of this good and bad out of there. That's just duality made in the mind. It doesn't even exist, right? So once you've gone through the experience and you're kind of on the tail end of it, I want you to then get into your journal and start to figure out, how did this plant help you relax, right? And start to find evidence to positively confirm your own bias. Because at the end of the day, everything is happening constantly, right? There are synchronicities and signs everywhere, but most of us are just not paying attention to them. And where we put where we put attention, energy flows, right? And so when we start to actually look for these signs, we start to find them. And because we're finding them, we see more of them. And before long, we start realizing, holy shit, I'm looking to, let's say, be more relaxed. And after I connect with this plant, that is happening. Holy shit, that's really wild. Now, what you can do is try an experience where you don't set an intention, right? Then dive into your journal after and ask yourself what that experience was like. Best case scenario, it's just going to be kind of confusing, right? Like, I don't really know what I got from that because I don't know what I was looking to get from it. Worst case, you could end up having a very challenging experience. And that's because I tell everyone that even if you don't consciously set an intention, it's not like an intention is not being made. It's just whatever's rattling around in your unconscious, right? Or your conscious mind that gets set as the intention. So what happens for a lot of people is, and this is something I want to bring attention to too, is people hit me up, why does cannabis give me anxiety? Why does it give me paranoia? Why does it make me lazy? And the first thing I tell them is, you and you alone make you who and what you are and how you show up in the world. The plant works as a mirror, as all plant medicines do. And this is why, like you were saying, in order to experience the great power that these medicines have, cannabis, ayahuasca, etc., it requires great responsibility, right? Like, these are not intro type things to get into. These are like, you must take accountability for everything in your life if you really want to benefit from these medicines. Otherwise, it's just going to be a lot of back and forth where you're blaming the plant, then you love the plant, and you're blaming it, and you're loving it. And that's not a healthy relationship. And the plant spirit doesn't appreciate that either. You know, it's like if you're a coach and you share with your client, hey, I want you to get this done by next week. And you don't get it done. And then you blame the coach, right? The coach is like, get the fuck out of here, dude. I gave you what you had to do, right? So at the end of the day, you know, one of the biggest things to understand is that, you know, anxiety, paranoia, any of these undesirable results with cannabis are actually exactly why you want to be connecting with cannabis. And I want that flipping the script for people. Like, the best case scenario is that you realize a distortion in your ability to recognize yourself as the one creator, right? Like everything in this world is. And you start to actually dive into that distortion, right? Whether it be anxiety, paranoia, etc. But what happens is, because people don't have the responsibility, they get into the experience thinking it's going to be fun. They don't set an intention. Maybe they've had a really hard day, a lot of anxious thoughts. And all of a sudden, cannabis mirrors that back to them because it gets them right into their subconscious. And they go, cannabis made me anxious, right? And the plant's like, dude, are you ready to be an adult? You know, like, or am I coaching an infant here, right? And so at the end of the day, I don't blame anyone for that distortion because we've never been taught how to utilize these medicines. I say often that there's no user manual out there for cannabis or ayahuasca or anything, right? I mean, again, there are, right, if you dive in, but they're very small pockets, you know, like this, especially with cannabis, you know, this is the most popular plant medicine, but also the most misunderstood. Many people don't even see it as a plant medicine, as a psychedelic, right? Even in the psychedelic community, people laugh at cannabis, right? But at the end of the day, this plant has been utilized in spiritual practice and occult practices for over 10,000 years. It is not new. This is not a new thing. This is more a remembering of how the world was actually working for millennia now, you know? And so that's what I would say when it comes to, you know, really how to connect with this plant, depending on what stage you're at, right? Whether you're a full-blown quote unquote addict, whether you're someone who's just tiptoeing in, maybe had some experiences, maybe haven't had others, you know, regardless, that's what I would start with. If you're addicted, start diving into your unconscious triggers. If you're coming in, you have a pretty healthy relationship with the plant already, start creating intention and confirming your own bias and start to build this relationship with the plant. And over a very short amount of time, I'm talking typically a week, 2 weeks, your life will start shifting. But again, it's not because of cannabis. It's because you took accountability and chose to work with a really powerful teacher that, because you took accountability, you can actually learn from. And now you're starting to remember your own power. And that's what these medicines want for you. They don't want you to worship them and think that, oh my God, I just need more of that to access that. They want you to get the message that this is all inside of you already, and that part of this lifetime is defragging your mind from the programs, the patterns, etc. And like you said, what an amazing time to be living, because this isn't just happening with cannabis, right? Why are people resonating with conscious cannabis? It's not just randomly because people are getting into conscious cannabis. It's because we're moving into a more conscious reality. We're going from a third dimensional planet into a fourth dimensional planet, and specifically a positively polarized fourth dimensional planet, one of love, right? One of service to others. And so as we start to get into that, part of becoming fourth dimensional is taking full accountability over your experience. And so I really feel like that's why right now the psychedelic renaissance is fucking exploding, right? Because people are starting to realize, holy shit, I'm carrying a lot of stuff. but people are at different stages of being able to take accountability and ownership over that. So that's what I would say with regards to each archetype that I work with.
Interesting. We have some people that come to La Guaira to work with ayahuasca to overcome cannabis addiction. I actually interviewed Big Bob, as I call him. He's like 7 foot tall. He came to La Guaira and quit weed for extended amount of time, and he was very happy. I interviewed him. So it's a bit of catch-22 though, because people, in order to work with ayahuasca, they need to kind of quit abusing cannabis to then be able to connect to ayahuasca and then hopefully address that root trauma to get rid of that pattern where they need cannabis to feel good. And obviously, as you say, overcoming addiction is not just completely saying no to that thing forever, because then it means that you're just suppressing addiction, but in being able to, let's say, more rarely work with cannabis in a more conscious way. So that sounds like a more healthy way of doing it. But let's talk a little bit about the science. I know you know a lot about cannabis. I know you produce some cannabis, which is highly revered by some of the big names in the psychedelic industry, so to speak, conscious space. So what is it about cannabinoids? What are the endocannabinoids? Why does it work so well in the human body?
Yeah, great question, man. So this is potentially going to be a big red pill for certain people, right? And I love sharing this info because, I think when you talk a lot about spirituality, you're going to have the science people are like, show me the science, right? And if you only talk about the science, there's going to be the spiritual people being like, show me the spiritual side of it. When in reality, it's both, right? They're two means to the same end. Science and spirituality are intimately connected. And that's one of the challenges in the scientific world and the spiritual world right now, is that both sides are bickering, not realizing they're both talking about the same thing, just in different ways, right? Science is a very masculine way to describe these things. Spirituality is a very feminine way. And at the same time, also, our science, there's a lot of challenges with that, and we'll get into that. But when it comes to the endocannabinoid system, this is the system that interacts with the phytocannabinoids found in cannabis, aka THC, CBD, CBG, etc. And it's also the largest regulatory system in our whole body. It's the only system that has two-way communication between mind and body. And this system also, it really supports different things like autonomic functions, like appetite, sleep, things like that. And also, it plays a gigantic role in balancing our nervous system. And when we think about the current problems in society, one of the biggest ones I see, and I've gone through myself, is nervous system dysregulation, right? Chronically being upregulated in fight or flight. When we look at what's valued in our society, right, in terms of a core value of at least Western countries, it's productivity. So really, like, the society we live in doesn't care how healthy you are, so long as you can get to work every day and produce. So because of that, coffee is the favorite drug of most people, and nicotine and other things that will just pump you up and keep you going, right? And the challenge with that is that, when that happens, you start to live in this state of chronic fight or flight, right? And it's very damaging for the body, cortisol, adrenaline, things like that. It's not a damaging system to be in the morning, right? Like, there's a natural flow you're supposed to go through. But, again, when you look at the ECS and you look at the fact that, when you look at endocannabinoids, right, anandamide, 2-AG, et cetera, and you look at the CB1, CB2 receptors and the whole endocannabinoid system, and you look at the fact that in some way, shape, or form, somehow, it just so happens that anandamide and 2-AG, right, two of the most important compounds in the human body that fit into the CB1 and CB2 receptor sites, also have THC and CBG and CBN, the phytocannabinoids from the plant, that fit directly into the same receptor sites, right? Now, you can't tell me that's by chance. That shows me, as a scientist, that we've co-evolved with this plant through millennia, right? Now, show me that system for alcohol. Doesn't exist, right? Or a lot of the things that we've normalized in our environment. Doesn't exist, right? Show me the one for coffee. Doesn't exist. And at the end of the day, one of the biggest red pills that, I want to give everyone today, I'm sure your listeners already know this, is that the government is not out for your health, right? There's no reason that cannabis is illegal that relates back to them trying to keep you safe, right? The whole reason cannabis is illegal, at least here in America, is because in the 30s, a couple of people got together that owned vested interests in big textile companies like nylon and also some other systems as well. And one of these individuals, Andrew Mellon, owned the biggest journalism empire at the time, right? Think about the mainstream media today. So William Randolph Hearst, right? Harry Anslinger, right? Who became the head of the DEA. And this guy, Andrew Mellon, got together and they were like, shit, dude, we're invested in oil and nylon and these industries, and hemp is going to annihilate what we're doing, right? So they got together and they formed this whole propaganda campaign, right? Smear campaign called Reefer Madness, where their whole story, and I recommend everyone go look this up and really dive into why your friends, your family, etc., think cannabis is bad. They think it's bad because what happened in the 30s is they released Reefer Madness, which was a story about how Mexican men were coming over the border from Mexico and raping white women with this new plant called marijuana. That was a term that was coined to be a racist term that really had nothing to do with cannabis. And what happened was they went to the legislature overnight and they basically brought this case. They were like, hey, these people are coming over, raping white women, all this kind of stuff, right? Super racist. And what happened was, the powers that shouldn't be at that time were like, should we have a vote on this? And they were like, did you just hear us? People are getting raped, right? So overnight, they made this medicine called marijuana illegal. And funny thing about this time was that cannabis was in about 80 to 85% of all medications on the market. So every doctor woke up in the morning and was like, wait, they banned what? Why did they ban cannabis, right? And so at the end of the day, when you start looking into all of this, you start realizing like, my theory, I don't have any research to back up what I'm about to say, but if you look into clinical endocannabinoid dysfunction or deficiency syndrome, and you look into certain, conditions like fibromyalgia or any of these kind of things that are kind of really hard to figure out, right? The modern medical system can't figure out what's going on there, or at least they say they can't. I really believe it has something to do with clinical endocannabinoid dysfunction or deficiency syndrome. Because I'm not just talking about smoking weed, right? I'm talking about hemp protein, having this protein as part of our diet, having these seeds as part of our diet, because they nourish the endocannabinoid system that deals with all these autonomic functions, right? It deals with your nervous system regulation. Look at a lot of the problems going on right now. People are fat, they're sick, they're unhealthy, right? And I'm not saying that the ECS is necessarily the only thing to look at with that, but it is an essential part of it. And so when you look into these things, you start realizing that this plant has been a part of our life for thousands upon thousands of years, not just to get high, but to eat the leaves, to eat the hemp seeds, right? It was a part of us. It was so important in the original Jamestown colony in Virginia when the 13 colonies were around that it was mandated by law you had to grow hemp because it was so valuable. They could make so many things with it that every citizen of that colony had to grow hemp. And the Declaration of Independence here in America is written on hemp paper. So like the irony and the ridiculousness of this whole war on drugs completely is just silly, but especially when it comes to cannabis, because how many people think that this plant is something dangerous, right? Or any of these things, when in reality, the plant is just a plant growing in the ground. There's no danger to it. The danger happens when human beings, right, running malware programs, start to utilize the plant for disempowering endeavors, right, and disempowering scenarios. And so at the end of the day, that's what I would say when it comes to ECS, how cannabinoids work with the ECS intimately. One of the other things I'll mention with regards to cannabinoid science is most people are obsessed with delta-9 THC, aka THC that gets converted through decarboxylation into delta-9 THC. And in reality, I think this is one of the biggest thirst traps in the industry right now. Because if you think back to even 15 years ago, right, there were no labs around, there was no test results, there was none of that. And some of the flower that people were growing back then that now they can test, right, because they've had clones and whatnot, hits like 13 to 15% THC. Stuff that would get laughed at today in the modern system. But it had the effect that people wanted. That's why they loved it so much. But now what's happened, because we live in a very masculine-dominated society, right? And that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. I'm just saying, like, analytically wise and logically, that's where most of us are at. We're not connected to intuition. We're not connected to these things. We're more like, show us the science, show us the research. And we'll get into that in a second too, and why that's silly. But basically, one of the things that people don't realize is that, going to a dispensary and asking for the highest percent is like walking into a liquor store and saying, I want moonshine every time. When in reality, there may be like, say you, God forbid, have a limb that's cut off, right? And you live in the 1800s. Yeah, you may need some moonshine, right? To like numb that pain. Then, and very similar with cannabis, like, yeah, if you have chronic pain or cancer, there's an argument for going high THC. But for most people, like you and I, your listeners, et cetera, looking to have a spiritual experience with cannabis, too much THC will actually dissociate you. And the Goldilocks zone is you want to be in the experience and be able to actually remember what's happening and be cognitively aware. If you go too far out, now you've just kind of overdosed, right? Now, I'm not saying overdose in a dangerous way. You can't die from cannabis, but overdosing in terms of like, it's not going to be able to help you. And it's not a fault of the plant. It's a fault of you overdosing it, right? And not lowering your level of titration to get the desired result you're looking for. And now when it comes to the science, because I definitely wanted to bring this up, there was an episode that Andrew Huberman did last year that I got hit up probably 100 times by people saying, what do you think about this? Oh my God, he's smearing cannabis. Oh my God, are all these things true? So I listened to the episode and immediately I realized where he made a critical error. So he is part of the establishment. He works at Stanford, right? So in order for him to get outside of the establishment would be an entire identity change for him. So of course, he's going to look to these establishments as credible, and he's going to look at the science behind them, and he's going to speak as such, right? And teach as such. The problem is, and if you look at Peter Grinspoon's new book, Seeing Through the Smoke, he calls all of this out, that do you know, Sam, that in America, and I'm not sure about other countries, but America specifically, you can only gain funding from the federal government to research cannabis if you're specifically looking for a danger or detriment to cannabis. Now, don't you think that would skew the results a little bit? If you can only even get funding for this plant if you're looking for something dangerous with it. Now, on top of that, let's say you are looking for something dangerous and you get your funding. Well, you can't go to the dispensary and connect with cannabis or study cannabis that was grown in a high quality environment. No, you got to get your cannabis from Mississippi from the federal organization called NIDA, who Peter Grinspoon nicknamed this strain the moldy mush strain. It's usually 5 to 6 years old when you get it. It's full of mold, full of seeds, full of stems. And that's the example of cannabis you're supposed to study. And the only way you can study is if you're looking for it to find a detrimental effect. And now we look at why people think cannabis is bad for frontal lobe development and all these things. It's not because cannabis is bad at any of these things, right? I'm not saying there's no things to be aware of, harm reduction, et cetera, of course. But this plant has been here for thousands upon thousands of years. We have a system that just so happens to perfectly match up with the phytocannabinoids found in the plant. If it was that dangerous, it wouldn't be that essential to our lives. And let's also think about the fact that Rastafarians and people like that have been connecting with cannabis even while pregnant and everything. All the things that people are terrified about, right? But at the same time, they fail to realize that they're telling you to take children's Advil instead of cannabis, right? What's more dangerous, a natural plant growing in the ground or a synthetic compound? Synthetic compound every single time. Why? Because it's not natural to planet Earth. And a lot of things that people don't realize too is that every pharmaceutical is just an isolate from a natural plant that they've been syntheticized, right? So, if anyone's I doubt it on your show, but if anyone's a pharmaceutical lover, it's like, cool, research what plant that came from, because that's always where it starts. So at the end of the day, this is what I want people to understand is you can form your own opinions, right? Everyone has their right to form their own opinion around cannabis, but make sure it's your opinion. Make sure it's not just something you heard on the news and you're parroting back, because when you look into this stuff, you'll start realizing, holy shit, every single study has been bought and paid for by vested interests in the pharmaceutical industries or things like that want to show that cannabis is nothing more than a useless plant so they can put you on Percocet or Ativan or get you in chemo or radiation or any of the things they make billions and billions of dollars through. That's the only reason cannabis is illegal, straight up.
Yeah, I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I do agree with some of those things. And when it comes to like psychedelics and why are they illegal, there's another story you can tell about, methods of control. And I'm not completely judging those people that control the populations in a certain directions. I understand that they have vested interest and they want society to just keep working the way it works, and they're maybe afraid to change. Hopefully we will change, and we'll do it gradually in such a way that society will not collapse, because it's another thing. I'm always asking myself, maybe when they were doing it, maybe they were thinking they were doing the right thing as well, because a lot of times we can create stories for ourselves that make us think we're doing the right thing, but we're doing a wrong thing. But the history and the time will put it all in its own place. You mentioned, plant growing in the ground. My approach to psychedelics and to what you can call drugs, quote unquote, is I only take or consume or work with stuff that's been around for at least 1,000 years and that grows from the ground. So I never tried even stuff like MDMA or LSD. I'm just like it has to have a tradition. So this is why I tried cannabis and I tried mushrooms, and ayahuasca and stuff like that. So I think but that's my own philosophy, right? It doesn't mean that it's right or wrong. Some people have more flexibility. But once I was working with mushrooms, and here in Colombia, you're allowed to grow up to 20 cannabis plants at a property legally. Actually, I have some cannabis seeds here. I don't know. And the only stuff that I would personally ever smoke, and I smoke really rarely, like twice a year, 3 times a year, something like that, is the stuff that I like saw growing. But I don't really like smoking a lot, but I really love growing cannabis plants. I think I have one growing right now. It's a beautiful plant. It smells so nice. As just geometrically, but I was working with mushrooms. I was in the ceremony and I looked at the cannabis plant, and I was having those two big, probably some kind of mix of cannabis and hemp. They're like huge, and they were, and I just looked at this plant and I couldn't take my eyes off it for like half an hour. It was so beautiful, and it was like you felt like this really nice like spirit presence and stuff like that. And I'm not the most hippie guy out there. Like I'm an engineer and all this thing. I work with ayahuasca, but I'm still a skeptic. But it was a beautiful thing, and I love that plant. It's very beautiful. So it's beautiful to help people to work with it responsibly. So I congratulate you on that. I want to tell you a story. My first ever psychedelic experience was actually on cannabis. It involved. I first came to Cali, Colombia. It was my second month in Colombia, and a friend of a friend that I met. And I never smoked weed before that. I was like zero drugs. I think I was like 26 or 27. I'm a very late bloomer when it comes to all those things. And a friend of a friend came over to visit, and he said, "I have this cannabis cookie." He asked me like, "Do you smoke?" I said, "No, I never." I think by then I tried cannabis a few times, but I didn't really even feel much. It was weird. So he said, "In that case, eat half of it because it's very strong." So I was like, I ate the half, and then it was so tasty. I was like, "Can I eat the other half? Like, how bad can it be?" He's like, "Well, it's really strong." And so I ate the other half, and it was terrible. Like I was vomiting. I was on the floor. And I think that was the reason it postponed my work with ayahuasca by a few years, because I was afraid there's going to be something similar. So edibles I've never did it again, never will. It's scary, but it was definitely my first ever psychedelic experience, but not a good one, but it was definitely psychedelic. So I don't know if you have any last recommendations for people as if they do want to work with cannabis, about dosages or the way to work with it. What's the best, safest practice? And what are your recommendations on the intentional work when it comes to ceremony? Should they do a ceremony, maybe, burn some Palo Santo, or like what do you recommend?
Yeah, great question, man. And what I want to bring attention to first is something you had said right before this too, about the powers that shouldn't be type thing, right? And I choose to believe that everyone is doing the best that they believe is right for the world, et cetera, right? And at the same time, when you look at, even Star Wars, right? Could Luke Skywalker have become Luke Skywalker without Darth Vader? No, he wouldn't have been able to, right? It would have just been like, hey, I want to be a Jedi. Cool, here's a sword. End of movie, right? Like, literally, it wouldn't have been any fun.
He wouldn't even be born without Darth Vader. Spoiler alert.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so, we require these individuals in the world that maybe to us are displaying something that we don't agree with. We need that in order to rise into the hero of our own story. And I really feel like God, right, may be all-knowing, but it is not all experienced. It's an equally valid experience to be a Darth Vader as it is to be a Luke Skywalker, right? In the eyes of God, all of that is perfectly divine, And so I wanted to say that as well, because I never want anyone to be like, I'm growing all this disdain against these powers that be. No, you don't have to, right? Use them as motivation to live your own life, become sovereign, right? Get yourself out of the system, connect with plant medicines, heal your trauma, connect with your family, buy land, get out of the system, grow your own food, right? Like that's the positive side of this, right? Is that we get to see and choose and be more discerning with who we spend time with, what we put in our bodies, how we choose to think, etc. And that's really the perfect day scenario I see out of all this. But when it comes to what you were talking about next, with regards to, advice for dosing and things like that, I'll kind of tackle this in a multiple segment thing, right? So the first thing is, you mentioned edibles. And this is something that a lot of people that are maybe new to cannabis may make the same mistake with. And again, I don't see it as a mistake, right? It was perfectly divine, but it could be a very challenging plant to work with. Especially you connect with ayahuasca, just like Aubrey Marcus and other people. And, I know for Aubrey, he's like, dude, I've almost had to have a field tracheotomy from being overdosed with combo. I've, had a hellish experience with ayahuasca, but nothing has compared to a strong edible experience in terms of challenge. And the reason for that is that cannabis is a very feminine medicine like ayahuasca, but it kind of puts you directly into that which is all potential, but no action. And so for a lot of us, especially us that are very structured, like masculine men, right? Like we get very uncomfortable in that because there's no objective, there's nothing. It's just all these feelings and there's no structure to it. And it can be very challenging to work with versus like even mushrooms, right? Like, yeah, they'll be challenging, but they're kind of pulling you along on a journey with you. So you don't have to worry about where you're going. You're kind of getting squeegeed by them as you go. Whereas cannabis is just, you're there and keep yourself busy for the next 6 to 8 hours, right? So when it comes to inhaling versus ingesting cannabis, there's some things to be aware of. So inhaling cannabis, right, whether through vaporization, that's always what I recommend, or if you want to smoke it, the strongest that effect is going to be is within about 15 minutes after onset. And then it's going to taper down, right? So it's like strong and then it tapers down. With edibles, on the other hand, right, they're the weakest they're going to be when you take them. And they slowly build up in strength. So I'm sure what happened to you is by the time you realized this is too much, you still had about 50% more climbing to go, and that's going to last about 6 to 8 hours. And the reason for that is because of how your liver metabolizes delta-9 THC. So you seem like a slow metabolizer of delta-9 THC. I'm also a slow metabolizer. Another way to say that is we're a very cheap date when it comes to cannabis, right? Which is a great thing to have in a certain way. And it doesn't really relate to body composition. So someone that's overweight could have a fast metabolism when it comes to THC. Someone that's very skinny like us could have a slow metabolizing rate. But basically what happens is when your liver metabolizes delta-9 THC versus your lungs, your liver actually converts delta-9 THC into a totally different cannabinoid called 11-hydroxy-THC, which is between 2 to 7 times more intoxicating to the CB1 receptor, right, the receptor site that engages with the intoxicating aspects of cannabis, than delta-9 THC is. So the translation of that is, of course, it's going to be a much stronger experience. Now, the one thing that may create a difference in that is if someone is a fast metabolizer of delta-9 THC, they will then be a fast metabolizer of 11-hydroxy-THC. So I used to have these like elderly ladies come into the dispensary, and of course I would tell them start with 2.5 milligrams, and they'd keep coming in and they're like, I'm trying 5, I'm trying 10, I'm trying 20, nothing's happening, right? And this is like literally an elderly lady in her 70s that's like 100 pounds soaking wet. Whereas like if I eat 20 milligrams, I'd be having an experience for sure. So sometimes there were just interesting things that happen where your body composition and just completely in the way you metabolize THC just makes you have a high tolerance, even if you're brand new to cannabis, right? So one of the best things I know for anyone out there that really wants to, maybe you're new to cannabis and you're like, hey, you know what? This seems like a lot of moving parts. Like I'd like to have some more theory on, I don't want to just do trial and error. There's a guy that I know named Len May who runs a company called Endo Health, and he has a great book called Cannabis is Personal. And he does DNA sequence testing for cannabis. So you can send out, right? I think it's like a hair sample or something, and he'll send you back, I think it's like $200. He'll send you a full report of what cannabinoids and terpenes work best for your system, what ratios like 1-to-1, 2-to-1, et cetera, CBD to THC, what methods of ingestion, everything. He'll also tell you if you have predispositions and certain genetic influences to schizophrenia, things like that. So that's a great way to really get tactile with this. And I think that's really what I see the future of cannabis getting into is less with the strain names. Not that I don't think they're hilarious sometimes, like asking for Alaskan Thunderfuck. Having an elderly lady ask for that is pretty funny. But at the end of the day, we know through phenotypic variation that the blue dream that I get here in Boston is undoubtedly going to be different than the blue dream you have in Colombia, right? They're the same genotype, blue dream, but I may have a phenotype that leans more to the haze side, more energy, more sativa. You may have the more blueberry pheno, more relaxing, more chill. And so if you're just going to a dispensary and you're like, I like that strain, right? I tried that in another state, I'm going to get that one. it's still a little bit of trial and error. So what I see the future of cannabis becoming is that you can get one of these tests done and you end up getting a number, let's say like 31 is your number, right? From 1 to 99. Then you walk into a dispensary and instead of saying, oh, we have Alaskan Thunderfuck or Green Crack or Blue Dream, they say, hey, what number are you? And I say, I'm a 31. And they say, oh, we have a 32. And these numbers are specifically correlated to make sure they work with your individual endocannabinoid system. So that's really where I feel like the industry is going, or I hope it's going anyway, because a lot of what Phylos, which they didn't age well, they sold all their data to Monsanto, but what they did do is they started mapping the cannabis genome. And what they started finding was like, there were like 35 different strains that were all called the same thing, right? And so like you're starting to realize that these names don't mean anything. You know, someone just comes up with a new strain or takes someone else's strain, puts a new name on it, releases it, and now it's the same strain but with a different name, you know? And so, you know, again, a lot of this is, you know, right now, a lot of it is trial and error, trying to figure out what, you know, works for you. But what I would always say is start low and slow. You know, you can always take more, but it's pretty hard to take less, you know, when you've already gone into the experience. It's not impossible. You can take full spectrum CBD and or chew black pepper kernels, and both of those will start to mitigate the intoxicating effects of THC. So if you ever end up randomly, accidentally eating an edible or something, Sam, use those to come back, you know, and you'll start, because CBD acts as a brake pedal to your endocannabinoid system, whereas THC acts like a gas pedal, you know? So if you're too far out, you're too revved up, come back down with CBD, you know, and black pepper kernels work because they have beta-caryophyllene, and beta-caryophyllene is a terpene that mitigates the effects of delta-9 THC. There's also ways to increase the psychedelic effects of cannabis with mango, dark chocolate, etc. Breath work can be a great thing to do. We host our monthly Breathe with Cannabis workshops that are amazing. And if anyone listening to this is like, I enjoy cannabis, but I don't believe it's a psychedelic, come out to one of those. We'll show you. You will leave. We don't have to tell you anything. Come experience it for yourself, and you'll see how cannabis can be a psychedelic. But that's what I would say is make sure you're going low and slow. Make sure that if you are going to inhale, do vaporization, right? It's more efficient, it's more effective, and it's safer. Because at the end of the day, you know, being a health nut, you know, smoke going into your lungs is not healthy, right? So even though, yes, you won't get cancer and these kind of things, for me, part of being highly optimized is making sure I'm doing the least harm with what I'm choosing to put in my body. And that would be vaporizing for me. I'm not a big edible guy either. I'll do them every once in a while if I'm going on a deep ceremony, but that's what I would say with that. With regards to ceremony and how to create a ceremony, here's some basics, right? You mentioned one with Palo Santo. So for me, ceremony, how I would define ceremony is a intentional container from which your intention can play out within. So let me give you an example. So let's say that you're exploring a creative block that you have or a trauma that you have. Well, a correct setting for that would be a nice private room, maybe your office, maybe your bedroom, right? It wouldn't be going to a concert, where that could be a good ceremonial container if you're looking to connect with some old friends and dance and have some fun, right? And so at the end of the day, if you're looking to create an intentional container, it's got to be relevant to what your intention is. So if you're looking to explore this creative block and you really need some space, some great things to do would be a 7-directional prayer, call on the 7 directions to support you in being able to move through potentially challenging experiences, burning sage beforehand to kind of neutralize any negative energy that you may be coming into the experience with, and also neutralize the energy of the space you're in. And then from there, reinvigorate that space with Palo Santo. And then from there, in terms of what to do for your ceremony, the most basic thing that I teach all my students is the classic body scan. It's a meditation where all you're doing is you're becoming aware and you're staying curious. You're not judging anything. You're not creating a story out of anything. You're just lying down or sitting down, and you're just looking at, what does my body feel like? What's calling my attention here? And you're just, let's say that all of a sudden you feel a certain tension in your left rib. You just focus on that, right? And you try not to make it mean anything. Oh my God, am I going to have a tight muscle there? Oh my God, is my back okay? Don't try to get into that, right? If those thoughts come, just watch them go by, right? And just focus on that and see what happens. And spend about 30 minutes with that, right? And when you come out, get into a journal and start to talk about your experience, right? Start to figure out, what did you feel? What did you sense? What did you experience? And start to really ask yourself, you know, what is coming forth in me? What is looking for more attention inside of myself? Some other things you can do, I already mentioned, breath work is great. You know, connection exercises is one of the best things to do in a romantic relationship. Eye gazing, being able to play what I call the curiosity game, which is, let's say you and I were playing it, Sam. What we could do is you and I could just sit, we could connect with cannabis, and then we could take turns for 5 minutes being either the speaker or the listener. And this is fantastic in a romantic relationship because typically men, what is the challenge we have? We want to fix all of our women's problems, right? All of our partner's problems. And that's a great intention, right? But women will always tell you they just want to be heard, right? They'll ask you if they're looking for advice. And so this is a great, great exercise to do because for 5 minutes, you'll have your partner talk, right? And you'll say thank you or maybe ask a follow-up question if the point is kind of completed. And then after 5 minutes, you'll ask them, how did it feel to be fully listened to? How could you see me, integrating this into my life in a way that would support you? And then you take turns, right? And you ask them, like, how did it feel to be the listener for 5 minutes? How did it feel to be heard like that? And these are great things to do with it. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. The best thing is you can do this in the comfort of your own home. For anyone listening, you don't necessarily need anything other than a couple of grams of cannabis or maybe even a gram of cannabis to do this quite a few times, So that's what I would say to start with. The other important thing is whenever you can, I know it's kind of challenging in the world we live in the industry that we have with cannabis, but try to find organic medicine because one of the biggest things that is a thirst trap and one of the things that people don't get yet in the medicine space is that the medicine that you grow has to be organic because if it's not, then you're pumping chemical salts and pesticides into there. It's going to traumatize that plant. And so then you're connecting with a plant that is also traumatized to try to help you heal your trauma. It's going to be very kind of like muddy, if you will. And also try to know the grower who grew your medicine because the big reason we call our grow course Grow with Cannabis is because it's very important that you are highly optimized when you grow your plant. Otherwise, the plant's going to pick up on your negative energies and get imbued with those, And so that's why I teach growing your own because the best way, just like Don Juan talks about, if you really want to connect with a plant teacher, learn how to grow it yourself, create a healthy relationship with it, and really form a bond with this plant as a spiritual aid and ally in yourself. So again, I know that's not always possible, so don't stress about it, but like gold standard is growing your own, making sure it's organic, grow it in the sun, grow with things like biogeometry to mitigate EMFs and radio waves and all these electrical currents that are around us. Use Korean natural farming ferments to really get the microbes going amazing, get that soil food web really healthy, and you will have a beautiful, beautiful experience with that, even if it's challenging, because you'll be able to come out of it seeing it happening for you.
Thank you, Ryan. This speaking and listening game, you and me, we're taking it to the next level today, even though we're not in a romantic relationship, not planning, but I've been listening to you for an hour and 20 minutes, and now you're next because we're doing what Ryan told me is called swap casting, was I interview him and he interviews me. So that's some next level stuff, 1 hour, 20 minutes at a time. Ryan, it was a lot of fun and very educational. I am sure people here that are struggling with a healthy relationship with cannabis are now going to be better. We will help them prepare for our retreats better, maybe because they'll know how to quit, and then maybe they can not feel guilty when they need to go back to this medicine if they have a specific intention. Ryan, where can people find more about you and learn about your work?
Sam, I just want to say this has been an amazing, amazing time, man. You're such a good interviewer. I'm so grateful for being able to come on and share some magic with you. And I'm super excited we get to do it all again later on today. Super pumped about that. But for anyone looking to connect, I love connecting with people. If you guys haven't noticed yet, I'm quite the talker. So trust me, reach out with any questions. You can find me on Instagram at @TheRealRyanSprague. My last name is Sprague. You can also go to highlyoptimized.me. Depending on when this podcast comes out, we have the waitlist open right now for the CCC. Crazy new offer. We have 2 brand new courses. You get the Grow course for free right now when you sign up. There's a lot of other bonuses we have too. And if this does come out after the waitlist, anyone who is interested in the waitlist, just let me know when it comes out and I will grant you what was on the waitlist, even if the waitlist is now closed. So reach out if you want more about that. And then also check out our Breathe with Cannabis workshops. They're a very low barrier for entry, $55. We have a different theme every single month. It's me, my buddy Aaron Abkey, and my buddy Christopher August leading you through a 2.5-hour live ceremonial experience. And the best part is it's virtual. You can tune in from the comfort of your own living room. We do them live from time to time. We'll be in Austin June 1st doing a live one. But that's where you can connect with me. Check out the This One Time on Psychedelics podcast too. If you enjoy conversations like this, I'm going to have Sam on there later on today and we're going to have a blast. So that's where you can find me. And again, guys, thank you for tuning in and reach out if you got any questions. Happy to support.
Thank you, Ryan. It was a pleasure. Guys, thank you for listening to Ayahuasca Podcast. As always, with you, the host, Sam Believ, and I will see you in the next episode. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you like our podcast and would like to support us and psychedelic revolution at large, please follow us and leave a like whenever you're listening to this podcast. Nothing in this podcast is medical advice. It's intended for educational purposes only.
Con la vida, vida de la baila, cura con la guaira, limpia, limpia